Okay, so one feature that fans no doubt want to see right at the launch of the Switch 2, including myself, is some form of full-on backwards compatibility. Now, we don't know exactly how Nintendo will go about doing this. It seems like it will be very simple if we are to believe the leaks about this being a successor console to the Switch that very much looks, runs, and feels like a more powerful Switch. I would expect it to have something for the physical solution like what we saw with the 3DS, where you have a different shaped cartridge, potentially just at the top, like a new notch on there, that allows only the new Switch 2 cartridges to be slid into that console, but you would also have that same cartridge port support your existing Nintendo Switch library of games for physical games. And we already know Nintendo's rolling Nintendo account forward. They have stated that themselves publicly to investors, and that will likely tie through all of our eShop purchases and allow us to easily re-download our entire content library from the Switch. Well, one thing that's been recently spotted online, which is very exciting, is potentially the most concrete evidence we've seen so far, suggesting that Nintendo is not only actively working on backwards compatibility support for their next console, but also putting in the tools to place to provide things like enhanced backwards compatibility, meaning your Switch 1 games will actually run better on the Nintendo Switch 2 hardware. There may be some work involved with that, but in theory it will be entirely possible. And thanks to some brand new Datamine information that just hit the internet recently, it appears that in the 18.0.0 system firmware that is running on our current Switches today, that some of the legwork and some of the code could have potentially been put into place to support things like a better running Switch 1 library of games on your Switch 2, and even the idea that Nintendo might be creating an even longer cross-generational support path than we were expecting when it comes to their software support for the Switch 1 and having Switch 2 versions of games that just run and look better. But we may see them do that with a select handful of titles, ones we know about and ones we potentially don't know about so far. So we're going to get on the same page with all of this info. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here. And we have to first hop over to Universo Nintendo, where they do have a write-up with exactly what's been spotted around this 18.0.0 system firmware update. And before we read through that, I do want to say this is great news and further information to support enhanced backwards compatibility. But if you're worried about backwards compatibility potentially just being missing from Nintendo's next gen console, I really don't think you have anything to worry about. We've seen interviews with the Ubisoft CEO where he's pretty much just come out and said that their plan is to update and resell Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope on the next generation Switch. And we've had a lot of different tidbits of information, all suggesting that Nintendo has this feature fully intact on their next gen console. Insiders like Nate the Hate going out of their way to post it on social media, just clip blatantly saying backwards compatibility is a thing in this console. And if you look at Nintendo's history with their handheld consoles and home consoles, unless if there's a massive media form factor switch up, they always provide some kind of backwards compatibility to the most recent system. So rest assured, we're going to get it as a feature, but the exciting parts has to do with these new details, which you can see here. Nintendo Switch 2 reverse engineering the current Switch firmware reinforces backwards compatibility on the next console. Nintendo is already paving ways to identify games compatibility in the hardware operating system. A group of hackers has continuously been doing reverse engineering work on the Nintendo Switch firmware with the aim of creating tools called homebrews for the most diverse purposes. It turns out that in version 18.0.0 of the firmware present on the Nintendo Switch, strings of codes 1, 2, and 3, these all link to different detailed readouts to the code of the Nintendo Switch 2. We're not going to walk through those, but those are the points of reference for the codes that they are talking about here, with instructions indicate that Nintendo is preparing its operating system to identify the compatibility of games between consoles. As explained by user Pokemaniac on the FamiBoards forum, specifically, the update appears to have added support for a new type of mount point, basically a way to expose system files for games classified as compat. Among some of the hypotheses raised by the user himself that can be considered in this new file assembly system aiming at compatibility between software and hardware are the inclusion of higher quality graphics features for Switch 2, shader caches from both the developer and from Nintendo itself. Assuming Nintendo uses unified file systems for cross-gen games, they could be used to emulate the PlayStation/Xbox approach by making some files available contextually. For example, Switch 1 game A, render and performance files, Switch 2 game B, render and performance files, protection for certain critical Switch 2 files from piracy or emulator developers. Of course, all these hypotheses are speculative since the raw code as it is found in the current firmware prevents us from having more concrete details about Nintendo's approach to the operating system of its future hardware, but it already provides us with a starting point for the company's potential choice in this regard. So I am not claiming to be a top-level tech expert here and have a full understanding of the breakdown of the lines of codes that these different data miners have found and are referencing online, but what is clear is that something that is in this 18.0.0 firmware for the current Switch today is basically laying a starting point for games to be able to realize what system they are being played on and hence have a different type of profile attached to them. So if your Switch 1 cartridge is in a Switch original console, it's going to stick to that line of code how it's expecting to run on a Switch 1. If it is plugged into a Switch 2, there could potentially be a secondary profile within the game code that's going to say, we have more processing power, we have more graphics compute power, we can crank up the frame rate, we can enhance things like the resolution with DLSS or things like that. Now, if you're talking about in-depth remasters, clearly there's going to be some additional work from the developers on that front. I am curious though, if we are potentially talking about something like just a baseline performance jump from a lot of the games that struggle to run efficiently and effectively on the current family of Switch systems, specifically some games that struggle in handheld mode. Would they do just fine on the Switch 2 with just plugging in the cartridge and minimal to no work from the developers, with them essentially just having to go in and enable a secondary profile that knows how to take advantage of the higher powered hardware? That is something that seems to be a very real possibility with these lines of code. It is also an interesting thought to entertain that maybe Nintendo is planning something of a longer cross-generational software support roadmap for the Switch 1 to the Switch 2, where obviously you're going to have your exclusives out of the gate to sell the next console. I am fully 100% confident that whatever the next 3D Mario game is, the AAA brand new from the ground up 3D Mario that Nintendo's been crafting this whole time since Odyssey, that's going to be exclusive to the Switch 2. But we have some games that we know are coming out on the current family of Switch systems that probably won't make it to market until the Switch 2 is actually launched and available in our hands, such as Metroid Prime 4 and Pokemon Legends ZA. Now, you take a game like Metroid Prime 4, for example, and I absolutely love the look of that first gameplay trailer that we saw at the last June mainline Nintendo Direct. It was the show closer. It was amazing. But if you talk about the capabilities of what we know is right around the corner with Nintendo's true next-gen leap in their hardware performance, I would absolutely kill for a version of that game that is going to run flawlessly at 60 frames per second with ray tracing enabled, with things like DLSS upscaling and a 4K resolution when docked, not native 4K, but via upscaling is what I'm saying here. I think that that kind of stuff is possible on the next gen console. I think that the level of detail that can be rendered will absolutely go up with the claimed power of what's to be expected with the capabilities of the next gen hardware, and in some cases with bigger, more demanding games like a Metroid Prime 4. We might actually see a true cross-gen launch approach for a game like that, where you do have a Switch 1 retail box available on your shelf, but next to it you also have a Switch 2 version, which is a fully enhanced version to take advantage of the new hardware on the next gen Switch. And we might even see Nintendo pull something of that Sony and Microsoft approach, where the next gen version is 70 and the prior gen version is 60. Nintendo's already technically gone to 70 with select titles on the Switch, like your Tears of the Kingdom out there, but I wonder if that would be that $10 price point difference to kind of push certain users that want that full visual quality experience available to them day one on the next gen console. They might have that little price increase there. And from there, that pivots me into how I hope we see Nintendo handle a lot of other games that they maybe want to remaster down the line, or really put some additional developer work in order to get the most bang for your buck when it comes to performance from previous gen games. Like, we've had outstanding rumors that there was a 4K version of Breath of the Wild developed essentially as a tech demo for the Nintendo Switch 2, but we also saw a code name directly linked to that game, which very much sounds like Nintendo may be planning to re-release Breath of the Wild on their next gen hardware. And would something like that, if you own Breath of the Wild currently, just be available as a $10 upgrade path? I'm not a huge fan of what Sony's doing with their remastered content lately. It seems like they're remaking a lot of games that were super recently released. We just saw the announcement of Horizon Zero Dawn remastered. yesterday at the Sony State of Play at the time of filming this video. I'm all for remakes and remasters, but when they're relatively recent and they still run on your current gen hardware and pretty much look fantastic, I don't see a big reason to do it. But nonetheless, Sony, to give them some credit, is offering upgrade paths for users that already own that game on PS5 or PS4 rather, that's the only version it has available, or PC. And if you purchased it on one of those consoles and you want to take advantage of the remastered version, they're not asking you for a fresh $70 full retail price hit, but rather you have the option to pay $10 as an existing user that owns that game and upgrade your game to the next gen version. That is what I am hoping we see Nintendo do and how they tackle this if they do decide to do some of these more technically advanced remastered projects. That said, those are two different things from just having your standard enhanced backwards compatibility where games just run slightly better because it's on more powerful hardware, and then there's going to be some games that they maybe fully dive into and optimize and even upgrade some of the textures and literally put additional development work into it. In that case, I could see them doing something like a $10 upgrade path. As long as there is a path and it's not just straight up repurchasing the game, I'm all for it. But nonetheless, this is yet another piece of concrete information that you have to put into your ever-growing list of evidence that backwards compatibility will absolutely be 100% a feature on this next-gen Nintendo console, and that is very exciting to me. What remains to be seen is what level of enhanced backwards compatibility can we expect, and will Nintendo have a longer cross-generational software support than maybe what we're expecting? Maybe far more support than just Prime 4 and ZA are around the corner for the current family of Switch systems. With the huge install base that Nintendo knows they have out there, they may not want to cut it off as soon as they typically do with fresh new console generation leaps. That said, Nintendo's Nintendo. I still think they're going to have plenty of exclusives clearly on their next gen console to help justify pushing people to that new platform as quick as possible. But that's where I really want to hear from you guys at this point in the video. What do you make of this new data mined information? Are you excited to see Nintendo potentially paving the way for games to basically know what platform they're running on and potentially have different profiles to take advantage of things like more powerful hardware for the Switch 2? And do you think that there's a world where Nintendo will actually pick a handful of the most popular Nintendo Switch games like your Breath of the Wild, Smash Bros, and maybe many others out there and potentially give them something like a 4K re-release on their next gen hardware? And if they do decide to do that with select titles, do you want to see Nintendo provide something like a $10 upgrade path for users to be able to upgrade that already purchased those games? Or do you think they might pull the anti-consumer move and just have them as a brand new full price retail release for the next gen hardware? And finally, if there were a handful of games that run on the Switch today pretty poorly that you want to see have some kind of enhanced backwards compatibility to take advantage of Nintendo's next gen hardware, what are they? So make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below before you leave, regardless if we agree or disagree. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn your notification bell. And with that, I've been Sunbro, you've been Nation. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.